Thank you for listening to Serves You Right. I'm sure you're wondering, how did I get so lucky that we have a Thursday episode as well? Well, to all the listeners out there who can't figure out if this is a twice a week or a one time a week show, I want to apologize. My life has had a little bit of chaos, and I am working to get back on that regular cadence. I just needed a little bit of time. There is a way to find out what is coming up in the future with this show, though. If you go to servesyouRightPod.com, right at the bottom of the page, there is a sign up for our newsletter. So once a week, every Thursday, I send out a couple of thoughts and then the episodes that we are putting out that week. So if you have not signed up for that, please do. And without any further ado, here's Brian, and we get to talk about a new form of distillate that I was not familiar with beforehand. Enjoy. Brian, thanks for joining us on Serves You Right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's been a while setting this up, and I'm sure it's been a while for you, because this has got to be a big project you've been working on. Tell me
Yes.
about dryads. Tell me about trees. How did you get started on this path?
Well, I didn't expect to find myself on this path, truth be told. I have for a very long time been interested in spirits that are made from things other than the usual suspects, sugarcane, cereal grains, and so on. But that wasn't specific to trees. I was aware of Sri Lankan arrack, which is a coconut palm distillate. That was kind of my gateway dryad a
Mm-hmm.
long, long time ago. But for a very long time, it was in the same spirit as there's a gin from Maine that's made on a base of carrot distillate. Things like that always kind of intrigue me because we don't use that many different species as the sugar sources for our distilled spirits, and that's always struck me as a failure of imagination. Um, so
Yeah, it's like we've got all these colors and we're painting every picture with like red, blue, and green, and that's it. It's like,
exactly,
yeah, there's
exactly.
more out there. Yeah, I do like
Um,
everyone goes for carrots as the first like thing in their hat. Whenever you talk
really,
about weird distillations, it's always carrots. Like even talking to oh shit, Jill Vossi, or I probably mispronounced that name, but she's like, yeah, you always have these bartenders who want to buy eau de vie of carrots, and it's like $200 a bottle. It's like everyone's weird reference is carrots for some reason.
yeah, maybe that means it's not as weird as we all think it is, right? If we all
Yeah.
keep encountering it somewhere, just in small quantities. Maybe I
Hmm.
should be going for quince brandy instead, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be another one. I do have to give you props because, you know, as I'm prepping for this, after I've read your book, after I'm putting together my notes, for a lot of times I talk to someone who's an author, and like Kelly White's a really good example. She has a very like, approachable book about intro to wine, how to be confident with wine. And I had probably a page of notes, just like little reminders I could look off to the side and think, okay, yeah, I need to make sure we talk about this and this. I've got 4 pages for you, and I don't know if I prepped enough because in terms of density, I think your book had some of the densest things that I've not been familiar with up until when I read it. So kudos to you for that. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I
I
feel
mean,
like if someone had been like, I've been in the bar world for forever, a bartender, and like I'd never heard about rum somehow. And then all of a sudden I
mhm.
found a book about rum. It's like, what is this? Yeah.
That's
So,
honestly kind of how I have felt and come to feel as I've been working on this is, spirits distilled from tree sap, but particularly palm sap. They're older than most of the categories that anybody,
mhm.
is going to be familiar with. We have written records going back 600 years that I can verify. We have probably another one from the previous century that if I spoke classical Javanese, I might be able to substantiate. And certainly fermentation traditions going back 2000 years. And even today, they're made on 5 continents. And for 4 of the last 5 centuries, like Indian Ocean palm spirits have been important articles of international commerce, and we live in the weird century where that's not true. So I
Mhm.
do feel a little bit like, I and people who read this book might feel the same way as they would if they just found out about rum for the first time.
Yeah. And, I chose rum there because, like rum, it's made all over the world. There's really no global consensus of what rum is. So there's all these
Hmm.
just various different things. And also you have, you pointed out, and we'll get to it later, but the difference between the like cachaça versus the molasses, where it's like
Hmm.
fresh juice versus the like processed Jaggerty, I think is what it's called, right?
Jaggery, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a world. Um, I think for our purpose, it'd probably help us to go back. I think it was 2013 was when you first tried that Iraq, right? And,
Yeah,
and
around there.
as a note, if I mispronounce anything, the whole episode, don't feel like you got to follow me. Please correct me. Like I even have some pronunciation notes, but I know I'm gonna step up somewhere. So
That's
please do.
fair. This is why I include the inline pronunciation notes in the book. Is
Yep.
there's so many new terms, so many names. There's no one who's going to read this who's going to be familiar with all of the languages of origin of everything that's discussed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want to perpetuate any, or I don't want to help anybody get sort of I don't want to make any mistakes permanent. So no
Sure.
problem.
Yeah. Be that guy that's it's like that's not how it's not Islay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, so you try this Iraq, and then 10 years later, you find yourself at Tales of the Cocktail.
Yeah.
So can you walk us kind of through that progression?
Yeah, as it was happening, it didn't necessarily feel like a linear progression. At least not to the destination where it's ended up with this book. I had wanted to. I mean, I'd gone to Tales of the Cocktail for the first time in 2012, and I had, for a long time before 2023, which is when I moderated a panel on this subject, I had wanted to be part of the education programming there. I had done um, panels at some of the other smaller conferences, and I had applied a couple of times for Tails and had not been successful. Um, so that I knew that was a goal that I had. I had no idea this was gonna overlap. I tried. The brand was called White Lion. It was a U.S. imprint that was importing spirits from Sri Lanka's largest arrack distillery, DCSL, and this it's not available anymore. DCSL, it's a different importer now. But it was so interesting. And in that same spirit of again trying things that, oh, this is made from the this is distilled from fermented pineapples, or this is or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, some neighbors of mine went to Quebec. They brought back what they described as a maple eau de vie. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I didn't know you could do that. Just a distillate of maple
Mhm.
syrup. Um, but I tried that and I promptly forgot about it until I was pitching the seminar to Tales of the Cocktail, which was meant to be, hey, let's try, let's do a variety of things that expand people's horizons.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This will be fast, I promise. Please take a moment and leave a comment on the show. It really would mean the world to me. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what we're doing well and what we could improve on. I'd love to hear from you all. All right, back at it.
Your palate gets a little jaded over time. Maybe your outlook gets a little jaded over time. You have so many people trying to convince you that the thing you're about to taste is utterly unlike anything you've had before in your life. And in reality, it's a bourbon with a slightly different grain blend or something along
Yeah.
those lines. It's like at a certain point, you start to imagine that you have had your last new experience. And I mostly just wanted to remind people that no, you haven't. Um, that's still possible. But I stumbled very much backwards into the idea that rather than let's pick three unrelated plants that people are making spirits from, let's do it entirely out of tree sap. And part of the way that happened was I got in touch with the new importer for DCSL there in Houston. They're called Pole Arrack. Devin Balisaria is the guy who runs the company. And I had heard of, I realize I'm jumping around a little bit here. I'd heard of Pedro's Ogogoro, which other listeners may also be familiar with. It had a sort of a huge sort of splashy media blitz a few years ago as kind of the first premium Nigerian palm spirit. So there's so many exciting words in that description, right?
Yes.
Um, and I, knowing nothing, I'd assumed, oh, it's a coconut palm spirit, it's like the one in Sri Lanka. It didn't even, I had no idea at the time how many different species of palm trees there are. Crap.
Hmm.
Um, but it was Devin who informed me that it's actually a different tree species, and that was what made me remember, oh, I had that maple spirit, didn't I? And so really, when I pitched the panel, I needed all three of the people that I was approaching to say yes, otherwise there was going to be no point. Um,
Hmm.
because what I ended up with was a seminar where we had a Nigerian raffia palm spirit, a Sri Lankan coconut palm spirit, and a Quebec maple spirit. So three different species of trees, three different continents, three different, traditions and styles. And all of those, for most people in the room, were things that they had actually never had before.
Hmm. Yeah. So no, that's
Okay.
perfect. That is exactly the kind of thing you get at Tails too, which is why I love
Hmm.
Tails.
Yeah.
I I've only been able to go twice. I've tried to go every year. Something always comes up. This year, my sister-in-law is coming in. I've never met her, so my family,
Really?
her family is Russian, so she's been in Russia and she's tried to
That'll
visit,
do it.
and it's been very difficult. Yes.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Um, so it's a bummer because you invited me to your debut, but we'll talk about that later, of course.
Yeah,
But
of course.
yeah, everything like I've done whole classes on nutmeg all the way to like Solera method, to like
Hmm.
all sorts of crazy things. So like it is exactly what you need at Tails. That thing
Yeah.
you can't find anywhere else. That's super cool.
There's a seminar a couple of years ago about aging in bottle gourds and leather, which was very, very interesting.
Yeah, I could only imagine. A little bit of earthy. That tasting section would be very interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm gonna assume that people in the audience there, and you talk about an after party too that happens after that. Like, you
Yeah.
probably got a very good reception just because it's so unique and so like novel for the public.
Yeah. Oh, we got a great reception. I mean, the seminar itself, it was the last one in that room for the day, and one of the folks who were sort of staffing the door, checking people in. I think we later learned was either from Nigeria or was like a first generation Nigerian American,
Mm.
and it sort of persuaded the other folks at the door, like, we can just kind of let this go. We're not in a hurry to leave.
Mm,
So
yeah,
we ended up taking, a lot more questions than we otherwise might have. Of course, I was happy to, the panelists are happy to. And especially in a moment like that where you really are introducing something new, you don't want to leave people hanging when they want to know more, right?
yeah.
But we did then, I think the next night or two nights later, we had a last call happy hour, as they call it, which at the time meant an event that started at 1 in the morning and was supposed to go
Oh
until
yeah.
3.
No,
Um,
Tails will wreck your sleep cycle if you've never been. Yeah.
oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You either need to be very vigilant about that or just accept that's what's going to happen for the next few days.
Yeah. Or very
Um,
young. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
Possible all three. Although I will say the our last call happy hour, which it was the Sri Lankan producer and the Quebec producer who both have products available for distribution in the United States, and had each sent people to the event, and we all sort of did this late night thing together. And I'm in my early 30s at the time, and Devin the Balasuria, Devin, because he lives in Houston, is 70, give or take. And he and I were the last two to leave at
Mm.
5 in the morning. And at that point, I think he was in better shape than I was. It helps to be young, but it also helps to be whatever he's got going on. He'll say it's the arrack. He maintains that that is the secret to his, hale and hearty condition.
Sure, we'll believe him. Read the book and find out how to live forever is a good tagline. Now that's when I woke up. So that's like, and I've done that at Tails too. So I'm just like,
Hmm.
I don't know how I do that, but It is what it is. I think if you're down for it, I was kind of hoping we could go through the book kind of in order.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think Sri Lanka is a good place to start. It's kind of where you
Hmm.
open things up, and they've kind of got kind of the biggest like presence. It almost feels like maybe not the
Yes.
oldest, but the biggest. You know, so
Yeah. I think that's fair. I'm happy just to run with that unless you have a
oh
more specific
please, yeah.
question you want to
I've got
ask.
other questions, but yeah.
But yeah, so basically the oldest kind of records that we have of palm spirits, as I alluded to earlier, are from the Indian Ocean. And where they were invented, kind of hard to say. Could be India, could be Sri Lanka, could be like Thailand, somewhere in that region seems like the most likely candidate. But Sri Lanka has been disproportionately a source of exported palm spirits over the last few centuries. And the Sri Lankan palm spirit industry today um, is particularly robust, even by the standards of palm distilling countries. Up until a couple of years ago, they had sort of four really big players in the industry, and all of those players could export to other continents. And actually, you can find all four of their products in the United States as well. Although, unfortunately, the stuff under the mesh and bone label is going to be pretty dusty because that's not imported anymore. And also, the company that makes it is not really operating anymore, which is very sad. But
Mm.
still three, which is pretty good. And you can get their stuff in Europe. You can get it in Australia. You can get it in North America. I'm not sure about Africa and South America, but you can also get it all over other markets in Asia. Um, and all of this is a lot more than is true of most of the other categories of tree sap distillates, including ones that are very, very ancient. I mean, people have been making palm spirits in Indonesia for hundreds and hundreds of years, and absolutely none of them are exported. You can't get them in Singapore, right? Um, but Sri Lanka, the industry is very professionalized. It's not completely consolidated. There are plenty of smaller producers as well, but it's dominated by a few big players, and they have the capacity for, you know, cultivating an international market in a way that is more challenging for a lot of the other countries that I've written about, at least for now. I see that changing in the future, but not
Hopefully,
in the next
yes.
6 months, necessarily.
Sure, yeah. No. It did kind of remind me of the split that happens like silly enough. I always need to have analogies to understand it, but like wine in
Mm.
California. You know,
Hmm.
you got a couple of big players and they
Hmm.
kind of dominate the markets, and that's what you get, especially if you travel overseas. And like you also have a bunch of like little micro producers that you can
Hmm.
get if you go there, but they don't really export. It's like only at the cellar door and that's it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and similar, and there's whole categories within Sri Lanka and Iraq that are exported and not. I mean, the sort of the standard expression that you'll see internationally and kind of the flagship expression is an aged palm spirit, an aged
Mhm.
unblended palm spirit, right?
Which is unique in all these.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very
In
cool.
a couple of other countries, there are people experimenting with oak aging, but it's not the dominant form for any of the palm distilling regions except Sri Lanka, where it's overwhelming. And the other really fun thing about the way that they age spirits in Sri Lanka is they're not aging them in, what we think of as sort of like a normal bourbon barrel size or even smaller. They're aging them in vats that are the size of the room that I'm in right now.
Mhm.
And they are made from a local hardwood called halmilla, which is a whole different kind of flavor than you would get from oak aging. So that's a little fun fact for you. It's
Oh no, no.
because nowhere else in the world, to my knowledge, I don't even know if halmilla grows outside of Sri Lanka. Certainly, nobody's aging spirits in it that I'm aware of, except for them. But
Mhm.
on the island, you can find unaged Iraq. Can't get that internationally, and you can find very very popular is blended Iraq, and sort of like here, that's Iraq that's cut with the neutral spirit of some kind. Um,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of that too. But that's not generally exported. It's not treated as a prestige product.
Sure. Oh yeah, that's the like bottom of the barrel Johnny Walker drink it there sort of thing. Send off the
Yeah,
blue
it's
label
it's
overseas.
it's it's
Yeah.
it's exactly, you put it in your flask when you're going out on the boat or whatever. Like that's the
You need that flask spirit.
yeah.
You really do. For the listener who has not had the pleasure of reading your book, which we'll send them to at the end of this, can you kind of walk me through how they get the sap? Because that is super cool and terrifying to someone that does not like heights. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I also do not like heights. But
Yeah.
I think listeners may be familiar with the image of tapping a maple tree, where you just kind of drill into the side of the trunk. That is not how it works with palm trees at all. So to get the sap out of a palm tree, you need to cut the what would other what, sort of the flower stalk, but before the flowers actually emerge.
Hmm.
Um, and that is in the crown of the tree. So in order to do that, you need to be in the crown of the tree. And palm trees can get to be 100 feet tall. And for the most part, except for certain, sort of um, varietals, I guess you might say, the short ones aren't that short either. This is 60 feet, say. Um, so people have to climb them. Tappers are climbing the trees, and they will get to the top, and they'll sort of cut the end of the stalk, and then they'll tie it up with twine or something, because otherwise it'll sort of tend to splay apart. And then they'll stick a collection vessel underneath it, a ceramic pot, a used like plastic soda bottle, so you can use the cap as a spigot. All kinds of things get used for this. But they'll leave that in the tree so that the sap will flow into it. And they will periodically need to either reshave the end or kind of whack the side of it with a mallet, just try to keep the tissue in that area a little bit damaged so that the tree keeps sending more sap, doesn't heal over. And then they'll also need to collect the sap periodically, which in practice they're doing twice a day, most places. Some places 3 times a day, though that's much less common. Which means that somebody is climbing to the top of the tree morning and evening, every day, every tree, because you're
Hmm.
not just tapping one, you're tapping a whole like acreage for this. And this is how they get the sap for all the palm spirits. Is how well, almost all the palm spirits. We can come back to West Africa in a second. Um,
Hmm.
this is how they get sap that you make, palm sugar out of, or if you're going to make a palm vinegar or something like that. It's all starting this way. Um, and and it's not only is it every day, but the other thing that boggled my mind as somebody who's, from sugar maple country is it's basically all year. It like I
Oh,
one of the Sri
yeah, that
Lankan
is cool. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
yeah. This is like 10, 11 months out of the year. I said something about all year to one of the Sri Lankan producers, and he was like, no, 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 we don't do it all year. We don't do it in January because it's too rainy and it gets a little bit more dangerous and the sap's not as good. And I'm like, man, we tap trees for like 5 weeks where I'm from. Are you kidding?
When lucky, yeah. That's cool. Yeah. You did
Yeah.
write about that in the book, but it's just so many dense things that I'm like, I forgot about that. But yeah, that is cool. The tropics, everything seems easier where it's warmer, nice and nice and gentle. It's yeah, life
Well,
year round.
the fermentation is also certainly easier because it just starts. The sap is very sweet. There's wild yeast in the air, and
Mhm.
it's fermenting in the pot when they bring it down to the ground. Like,
Yeah, which is its own blessing and curse,
hmm.
So it also necessitates the daily multiple time removal because if
Yes,
it's fermenting, you gotta take it that day. Yeah.
exactly.
Man, it never occurred to me, and it made so much sense, and I felt silly afterwards, just thinking about the fact that palm sugar you see at the stores, like palms are just kind of unique in having a lot of sugar in their sap. Like,
Hmm.
and like it's a very simple realization, but I'm like, I never once thought about where they were getting that from. But it's like, of course
Me
they're getting
neither.
it from palm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, yeah, it's just a type of sugar, but yeah. And so talk to me about how after they've collected it, how they make it, if you don't mind.
Yeah. There are a few differences kind of from country to country, but the sort
Hmm.
of overall commonalities here. I mean, the fermentation moves very, very fast. I know we just sort of alluded to that, but like I have had a pint glass of toddy, which is what they call the fermenting palm sap in Sri Lanka. That goes by 100 different names: palm wine, West Africa, tuak, and um, uh, Indonesia, tuba in the Philippines. Um, and literally, like in the, I don't know, hour, 2 hours that I was on this farm drinking this
Bubbling.
toddy, like which was actively bubbling in the glass, absolutely.
Yeah,
And it was sweeter at the top and like drier and more sour at the bottom. Just by the time I got there, because it kept it's a very, very live, active probiotic thing that you're consuming.
sure, yeah.
Um, and so yeah, basically, if you want to distill it, that's actually great up until a point at which it becomes a problem because then you start, going to vinegar. And so either you need to get started quickly, like within a day, ideally. Like
Hmm.
sooner is not necessarily better. Basically, like you want no sooner than the point where all the sugar has gone to ethanol, obviously. But like subsequent to that, you don't really want to wait any longer than you have to, or you want to add something that's going to maybe like arrest the fermentation a little bit, or just sort of change the speed or the way in which it's transforming. Like they often use coconut husk for this in Indonesia, which they have described to me as fermentation starters, and I think that something may have gotten lost in translation there because the fermentation's already started, but there's going to be
Hmm.
different microbes on the husks potentially than have colonized the sap. And that's going to sort of, I mean, it clearly does change the flavor that you get from the spirit. From experience, I can say it tastes different from similarly made spirits in other places that don't take that step. Um, but basically, yeah, you want to kind of get the fermenting sap near your stills as quickly as possible. There's even a producer in the Philippines that brings yeast to like cultured yeast to the farm so that they can like pitch it there and exercise control because by the time they got it back to their distillery, it would be way too late.
Yeah.
Um, Depending on the country you're in, they'll use different styles of stills for this. So Sri Lanka, they have, what are, listeners are probably going to be picturing sort of big pot stills and column stills like you might see at a Scotch distillery or a rum distillery. Um, in a lot of other places, especially in Southeast Asia, they're using internal condensation stills, which, as I understand it, are maybe more along the lines of what you might see in China. Although I'm by no means an expert on that distilling tradition.
That's the
Um,
next Tales of the Cocktail pitch, right? Yeah. Yeah.
um, but essentially, you imagine an external condensation still is sort of the classic image of a pot still where you've got a big line arm coming out the side. And so the vapor is condensing away from the boiling chamber. Whereas an internal condensation still, usually you've got like some mechanism, maybe sort of like a dip in the ceiling of it, so that the it can't really escape. It just has to go up onto the ceiling, and the point where it condenses, where anything's going to condense, is going to be right at that bottom, and then it's going to drip into a receiving vessel or an outflow spigot or something along those lines.
Hmm.
Um, and this is a very common sort of traditional still design in a lot of East and Southeast Asia. It's actually stills along the lines of the ones from the Philippines are the ones that ended up in Mexico in the first place. That's
Yes. I was gonna say
longer
shout out
story.
mezcal. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of them will advertise they use Filipino stills, as a marker of tradition and quality. Um, but so that is something that I'm trusting other sources a little bit here because I haven't done enough of a side by side of different like still styles. But it's consistent with my experience, and it's like what David Wondrich has written as well, which feels like a pretty good.
As far as a
um,
reference goes, that's a pretty safe one to throw out there. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. The internal condensation stills will often produce spirits that are like funkier, that
Mm.
have um, and ways that I might describe that more specifically are like the total number of distinguishable flavors might be greater. And some of the ones that you will retain, and you'll retain some that you might lose with an external condensation still. Um, it's I worry that if I say this is going to sound pejorative, I really don't mean it in that way. But
Mm.
it's a little bit messier, I think sometimes. But in the same way that like barbecue is messy,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not a bad thing at all. It's possible for something to be too clean, I would,
I'm kind of thinking of it as like, a highly aromatic beer versus like Coors Light. Like
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
like they're like very standard, very low, but non-offensive is probably the best adjective I could use for them. But just like
Hmm.
technically correct, has alcohol, has bubbles. Whereas like,
Precisely.
yeah, I mean the craft brewing movement is all about flavor, and sometimes
Hmm.
flavor does involve some like rough edges. Like like
Yeah.
I've had some craft beers that I'm like, I this is a little too intense or too XYZ, or like I
Hmm.
don't know if this would get past a international like brewing company, but
Hmm.
there it is. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we
Yeah.
all have, right? And you figure in this case you've got a normally wild fermented, kind of product, which is then being distilled in an internal condensation still, and you end up with like I don't know the tasting notes I give for lambanog, which is the palm spirit from the Philippines, is things like yeah it's like papaya and green olive
Hmm.
and like all kinds of kind of savory and underripe fruit and sour things that so many of them that I don't super associate with distilled spirits and that I certainly don't really associate with being in the same distilled spirit as each other. Um,
I've got one for you. A quote. I believe it was "birthday cake and Szechuan peppers" that you said,
yeah,
and like
yeah.
that was one of those lines that I read and I read again and I thought about it and I read it again. Like I'm trying to imagine those flavor combinations. So yeah, it's it. Yes, rough edges maybe, but not in a bad way too.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah, I have to say that is one of my favorite tasting notes in the book, in part because it's so what, and also in part because, like, the moment that that kind of came out in a tasting session, I was like, no, that's exactly right. Those are. If I had to pick two things to describe the spirit to someone, those are the two. And this is for context, for listeners, that's talking about a West African raffia palm spirit. This is Pedro's ogogoro from Nigeria that I mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
Has uh, more than two flavors, certainly, and plenty of other ways you can describe them. But I think those two are good kind of place to plant the flag and say, this is the kind of thing you're going to be getting.
Yeah,
Um,
crazy enough. um, you alluded to it a little bit, and we've talked about the Philippines and kind of their, how they spread the know-how of distillation to the world.
mhm.
But I thought it'd be cool. Could you touch a little on the whole Magellan side of things? Because I
Oh my
think that
gosh,
is such
yeah.
a cool story. Yeah.
Yeah, so of course the Magellan voyage, the first attempt to circumnavigate the world, and Magellan himself did not survive. He got into a fight in the Philippines, and that was the end of Magellan. I think in the end, like 18 maybe of the original crew, like fewer than 20 of the original crew, actually completed the voyage. And one of them was a Venetian named Antonio Pigafetta who wrote an account, like the major account that we have, the
Mhm. Why
firsthand
we know
eyewitness
about it.
account of
Yeah.
this. Yeah. And he ends up being quite a helpful historical resource for, particularly for somebody like me who doesn't, speak Javanese and Chinese and Arabic, uh, to, to be able to like trace back. Oh yeah, he was here, right? They had rice spirits here and palm wine, so probably. Maybe they didn't have palm spirits, but they easily could have. Somebody nearby probably did. Oh, here they definitely had palm spirits. Um, and one of the, I think, very cool things for me about this research process was that there are so many points where the history of these spirits touches on the history of the world, and where like the most relevant source is somebody I've heard of before. I've heard of Magellan.
Thomas
Are you kidding?
Jefferson. Oh,
Thomas
hey,
Jefferson.
yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Holy
Yeah.
crap. Yeah. The first written record of a distilled spirit made from maple sugar. There's an earlier reference to fermented maple sugar, but this is the first one for a distilled spirit. Is Thomas Jefferson writing to George Washington in the 1790s while Washington is president, and I think Jefferson is still Secretary of State. Like what?
Yeah.
Um, but in the case of sort of the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, a lot of the sources that at least that I have access to are are travelers. Like I quote Marco Polo in this book. I quote
Hmm.
Ma Huan, who sailed with Zheng He, the Chinese treasure fleet in the 1400s. Like, he is the earliest source that I'm like super confident in for a palm spirit anywhere, which I believe was in what is now Thailand. Um, and as I said, there's one in Java that if I had more confidence in my ability to cross-examine the translations I've seen, might scoop him by about 60 years. But for now, he's the record holder that I've been able to find. Um, but yeah, it's a spirits history is a really fun reason to read a lot of accounts of people, kind of in that period where whether they're coming from, China or Europe or the Middle East or wherever, are moving around a little more than they had been in the centuries prior and are kind of, you know, encountering unfamiliar cultures and material practices for the first time. Like that's interesting to begin with, but this is a great lens through which to be. I'd rather be learning that because I'm reading about this than because I'm reading about the history of the black lead trade, which I'm sure is also very
Yeah.
interesting, but doesn't excite me
Yeah.
quite as much.
Or like if you study language, like the slow migration of different sound patterns. Like if you're a linguist or something, I'm sure it's very interesting, but it's like,
Sure.
yeah. I don't know. It's a little bit more fun if you can drink your history too. So
I certainly think so. Um,
what really impressed me, and this is something I even talked to my wife about this, like when I was reading your Indonesia section, I think it was like 1300. There was like consolidation and like, like, and then there's this whole like progression where it became a Muslim dominant country. And I'm like,
mhm.
I don't know anything about Indonesia. I mean, Western European,
Yeah.
American, like there's whole sections of the map that were in your book that I was like, well, shit, I don't know anything about this place either. Like, and there's some crazy stories, I'm sure. Like all the stories we have of the Genghis Khan and all that, I'm sure that just as interesting and just as world changing, just
hmm
not part of our oral history or what we're taught in school.
Yeah, I think it's really a crying shame. There's some very, very interesting history in that part of the world. There's frankly some stuff that's worthy of like, an HBO miniseries. I think I even said that in the book. Um, I read there's a really excellent book on that period. I probably did more like historical context reading for Indonesia than for any other chapter of the book because I really also went into this like I know nothing about this part of the world. Um, and Majapahit, which is the name of the empire in question, but is also just the name of the book, came out while I was working on Dryads. That was very helpful. And I consulted that. I consulted yeah, Bandit Saints of Java and some other things. Basically, I got to a point where I had gotten sort of deep enough into the Indonesian rabbit hole, and it's so interesting. And I had written a lot of the Indonesia chapter kind of with that in mind and thinking like this is going to be context people will need. Especially because Indonesia is a massively Muslim majority country. And hey, guess what? This is a book about alcohol. How does that work? And I feel like the history is kind
Hmm.
of important to understand that. And my editor's notes came back to me on that chapter, and they're basically like, can we consolidate some of the Indonesian history? Like, it's very interesting, but it does feel like we're getting a little bit away from the scope of the
Yes.
book.
This 200-page digression here. Yeah.
200 page. I will. Um, but yeah, so this is the short version, basically. And I can recommend some books if you want to read the really long version because it's a really really interesting part of the world and a really interesting period, I would say.
Yeah. And the good thing is we've only touched on it in like very broad strokes. So again, if you're listening, just go get the book. It'll be out by the time this comes out. So
That's
um
true.
I feel like can you kind of tell us about it was Jaggery, that whole process and like it seems like that's kind of a dividing line in the book from the palm going towards the maple and onwards. So
Yeah. So Jaggery's a name for a sort of semi-refined sugar that you can get in South and Southeast Asia. It is often made from palm sugar. Sometimes it's made from cane sugar. It sort of depends a little bit on where you are and who's making it. But if you think about, sort of like a Demerara sugar or something like that, that's still some of the it hasn't been refined all the way to like pure white sugar. It's
Mhm.
retained some of the character of the sugar source. That's kind of the vibe that we're going for here. When I've had it, it's got kind of the color and consistency of wet sand. Um, and so there's a point. Basically, the first six chapters of the book are about palm spirits, and then two on maple, one on birch, and one on directions this could go in the
Etc.
future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the four major kinds of trees: palm, maple, birch, and future. Yeah, those are the that's my little joke about that. But so of those six chapters, the first like five and three quarters are basically about wild fermented palm spirits, overwhelmingly. But there's a chunk of chapter six where I dive into, okay, but what happens if we make a palm spirit from palm sugar instead of from fresh palm sap? And the word that I suggest for this, as in the same way I'm suggesting dryads for tree sap distillates as a whole, is jaggery dryads. It's sort of like analogous to molasses rums. It's the and indeed it is very analogous to molasses rum, I would say, because you've taken the fresh sap and you've boiled it. So first of all, that's already chemical and flavor transformations at that point. Um, and additionally, you're not going to be using the wild yeast anymore. You're going to have to use some sort of cultured source of yeast. So you are getting a product that will not have as much, say, like colonization by other microbes that are going to produce their own sets of flavors. And so much of this clicked into place for me the day that I tasted the one palm spirit that's made in the United States. So like, hey, good for the US of A. We're the only country in the world that I'm aware of that makes dryads from like two different tree families, palms and maples, um, because we
Mhm.
contain both like New York and California. Uh,
Yeah.
but in Petaluma, California, there's a distillery called Barberly Spirits, and they make a Philippine style spirit. That's what they're aiming for, but they make it from palm sugar rather than fresh sap because there's not like an active palm tapping industry in the San Francisco Bay Area, as it turns out. Um, and the first time I ever tasted it, I was like, wow, it's like somebody it's the same thing exactly that would happen if you turned like a rum agricole into a molasses rum. It's like somebody took that exact transformation, that algorithm, and ran it on Philippine lambanog to get to this spirit, which is basically what they did. They did the same things to it to make that product that differentiated in the same ways. But in practice, what that meant was like again, I think the total number of detectable flavors is a little bit smaller. It's a little bit more kind of tightly controlled. Um, there's a base note, a little bit of that sort of sense of like a deep kind of phenolic almost, something that reminds you more of cooked sugar. In a way that lambanog made from fresh sap just doesn't have whatsoever. That is a tenor and above spirit all the way. Um,
Mhm.
and sort of thinking of taste almost as colors, it's like it's less green, it's a little bit more brown, a little bit more white almost. And so for me tasting that, at this point, I'd had a lot of lambanog, I'd had a lot of like dryads of various types, and I tasted it, and I'm like, okay, I see the lambanog here. And I see how, especially in cocktails, it works as a good substitute. But I also kind of feel like some of the unaged maple spirits from Quebec are like this. And like I would want to try this in some of those recipes as well, because I think it has enough flavor notes in common with them that it would kind of work. And so that does end up becoming kind of I think of it as sort of a hinge point in the book because I talk about jaggery palm dryads in that chapter, and there's a few of them in other countries as well. Um, and so I think that's worth mentioning. It's also like molasses, it's the way that producers outside who don't have a local kind of palm cultivating industry or palm tapping industry, at least, even if they have lots and lots of palm trees, it's a way that they can, kind of access that and make their version, just like they're doing in California. Um, but then the other crazy thing about that is it made me realize, oh yeah, and literally every single maple spirit in the world is a jaggery dryad because they're all made
Mm.
from maple syrup. They're all or well, yeah, from maple syrup. That I don't think anybody's making it from like dry maple sugar that they're then, rediluting. Um, although probably that's what they were doing in the 1790s. Maple syrup wasn't yet the standard way of selling, concentrated maple sap. But nobody that I'm aware of is making from fresh maple sap. And that, of course, makes me very curious about, well, gosh, what would a non-jaggery maple dryad taste like? Um,
Yeah.
which hopefully I get to find out the answer to that someday.
Hmm. Well, yeah, it's if I remember correctly, you could freeze it. There are other methods that you can concentrate without
Yeah.
through the boiling process, right?
And
The reverse
I've
osmosis,
tried this a
yeah,
little
like
bit myself. I've tried the freezing. The freezing is very thermodynamically efficient if you do it. It can be it can be very thermodynamically efficient because if you're just taking advantage of the fact that it's cold outside, it's below freezing at night generally, in the maple tapping season. Like this is like an ancient indigenous technique, right? To concentrate maple sap is leave it in like a trough outside and let some of the water freeze off, and then you can pull that off in the morning. Do it a few times, and you get something more and more concentrated. Um, you will lose some of the sugar as you do that. Some of it will be retained in the ice, but you will, which is not true if you're boiling it, like you're going to get 100% of the sugar yield that way, but at significant cost in like energy and usually also in labor and time in practice. Which is why a lot of modern syrup producers, to say nothing of maple alcohol producers, use reverse osmosis machines, which are very energy efficient, don't require any boiling, but do let you basically pull water out through a permeable membrane and concentrate the sap that way. The crazy thing about that, though, well, it's not crazy. The sort of funny thing about that is even if you have this, technological solution to that problem, they usually then end up, they'll take 80% of the water that they need to get out through a reverse osmosis, then they'll boil it the rest of the way. Because if you want maple syrup, you want it to taste like maple syrup, not just like concentrated maple sap. And as it turns
sugar,
out,
yeah.
part of that flavor is from the boiling process and the sort of the cooking of the sugar.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Um, I do, in this discussion, I did want to give you a shout out. I think it was here where you said you were tasting this Jaggerty Dryad, the first one, and it was kind of a subdued element, even though there were the flavors there, where you
Mm,
compared it to how, like you like, and this is one of those things that everyone who's listening will be more familiar with, how things that are distillates from agave all kind of share a similar element throughout that you can
hmm
instantly recognize as like, oh, that's an agave distillate, even if it is like, you know, from the like most mass produced one to like most artisanal, like you've got that agave note. It is like that thing that makes it that thing. And I thought that was cool that there's like an undercurrent of dryad that you like, it carries through kind of you can detect it even if it isn't like maybe just a different version, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, certainly across palm spirits within a tree, this is definitely true, right? Like
Hmm.
I can tell you the flavor differences between the coconut palm spirits from India and the Philippines and Sri Lanka and California and Indonesia, but I can also tell that they're all palm spirits when I taste them. Sri Lanka, I think is maybe where I made the reference that you're referring to specifically, that there's a flavor there that I can't identify other than to say it tastes like a rack. There's something
Yeah.
there. Every rack I've ever had has this taste in addition to whatever other tastes they have. And if you haven't had it before, it's really hard for me to explain it because I couldn't tell you
Hmm.
a thing that I had before that it tastes like. But the other thing that I did find fascinating when I did this seminar at Tales, I had had Iraq before, as mentioned, a decade prior, and I'd had a maple spirit, but not the one that Joel from Distillery de Saint Laurent had brought for the seminar. Um, and I'd never had a ogogoro, the Nigerian raffia palm spirit. And so I did go into that a little bit blind, like, well, I'm just going to trust that these are going to be good. My faith was paid back.
Yeah.
richly rewarded. They're delicious products. But obviously none of the panelists had each other's products either. So at that point, it was very interesting for me to hear them talking about like the similarities that they were picking up on between the things that they made across species and continents.
Mm.
Which I didn't necessarily expect going in. I don't know that they did. I don't know that the audience did. Um, but I mean, my central thesis in all of this is that it is reasonable and worthwhile to conceive of distillates of tree sap as a coherent category that has many, distinct and interesting expressions, but nonetheless, that it is reasonable to talk about them in the same breath as things that have meaningfully more in common than they have with other spirits. In the way that we might talk about whiskey generally, or like
Mm.
brandies or fruit brandies generally. That's the
Yeah.
way that I would like people to see this. And in that light, looking back on it, well, of course it makes sense that when you get three producers of these kinds of things together, they're going to find the ways in which they're alike.
I think that whiskey is a really good example there because, whiskey is a category that holds Lefroy and Jameson
Hmm.
and also Knob Creek and like
Hmm.
wildly different from all three.
Yeah.
But there is a commonality. Like there is they are all cousins, even if they are just like wildly different.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
I like that. What do you hope this book does? What are your plans for the future?
I mean, yeah, man, like the hubristic, sort of pie in the sky answer, uh, is also the honest answer. I wouldn't have done this if I couldn't imagine a future that was sort of like the glittering palace of my hopes and dreams. Um, uh, I'll start small here. I see this trend is rising around us, right? We are seeing more of these spirits being exported. We're seeing more of them getting talked about. There was a ranking published by, I forget which organization a couple of years ago, but that ranked lambanog like the second best tasting spirit in the world behind, I want to say, Campbelltown Scotch. Um, it was one of the scotches. And like no one saw that coming. The people in the Philippines didn't see that coming. They loved that, believe me.
Mhm.
That got a lot of press.
Yes, Judgment of
Uh,
Paris for
yeah,
the
yeah,
Philippines.
seriously.
Yeah.
Um, so what I really fundamentally want to do here is kind of capture the energy that I see around this category already and kind of channel it, make it, help it be a little bit more universal, I would say, because again, even the palm producing countries, the maple producing countries aren't selling their spirits in each other, to say nothing of other markets. Within the United States, we have a dozen or so maple distillers, and not a single one of them has their products available outside of the state where they're made for now. And in fairness, that's because these are all very, very small operations for right now.
Hmm.
Um, these are farm distillers. These are places where it's between like one and five people work there, including the owners, and so I get that. But I think of this very much as an a rising tide lifts all boats situation. And I think that if I can help consumers, if I can help, importers and media and bartenders kind of get this idea of dryads into their heads, that it will make it easier for them to be open to, if not the first one they encounter, then at least the second one they encounter, right? Maybe it's going to be an uphill battle for, Rockland Distilling from Sri Lanka or Lacan from the Philippines or whoever to convince a buyer to bring it into their bar, to convince a consumer to give it a try. But if they've got the idea of dryads in their head and they try one and think, oh, that's interesting, then it's so much easier for the next company, for Distillery Shefford in Quebec, to be like, oh, you've had a dryad before. Here, try this one. Um, Long term, my golden, aspirations here are like I want to live to see like a dryad section in a liquor store. I
Yeah.
want to go into a hotel bar and they've got a spirits list and it's like whiskeys, brandies, dryads. Amazing. That's what I'd love to see that. The book is full of cocktail recipes. It's not full of cocktail recipes by volume. It's much more full of other things. But there's a lot of cocktail
Mhm.
recipes in the book. And there we have a canon of classic drinks for whiskey. We have a canon of classic drinks for gin, for every other major category. There are things that when people say, "Oh, like what is a tequila cocktail?" Everyone listening to this podcast has at least one answer to that question.
Almost
Uh,
certainly, yes.
right?
Yeah.
And in part because I do want to make this easier for readers and consumers, and for bartenders who want to adopt these things. Like, I wanted to provide cocktail examples that would be, achievable, accessible, within reach to be replicated in other places. Because that's how you make a classic cocktail, right?
Mm.
Is it gets served in multiple places. It gets made by people in their house sometimes. But so I'd like some of these to become the canonical dryads cocktails for their respective kinds of dryads. My goal, I suppose, if I were to put it in many fewer words, is that I would like to eventually see people treating dryads as a spirits category in the way that we currently do with the other spirits categories, gin and rum and so forth.
No, that I think is a very healthy goal, and it's one that isn't without precedent. In recent memory, mezcal
Hmm.
kind of went through the same thing where,
Hmm.
it was growing by like 400% every year, and that meant like
Yeah.
4 people to 16 people were drinking it. But now not every restaurant in the US has it, but a lot do, and some have several, and some have a whole list. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, will dryads ever get there? That's not as clear, but like, you know, uh, what I'm kind of thinking is like Benedictine. Not every
Hmm.
house has Benedictine, not even every bar has Benedictine, but you can find
Hmm.
it in most cities. Like I had
Yeah.
trouble finding it in Omaha. No, I just did, and like any dryad, and so getting it just to that level would be nice, and I think very doable. You know.
Hey, from your lips to God's ears. Like I think so. I hope so. That's what I want. But for what it's worth, I'm in Massachusetts. None of these are available here.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
I had to write this whole damn book without being able to get any of the spirits locally.
And
Um,
thank you for sending me a list. I didn't get a chance to tell you I had a comedy of errors trying to order this online. So I went to
no.
3 different ones that you'd recommended. I tried to, and it was
Hmm.
getting blocked. And I was like, I don't know why this is happening. And it turned out someone has stolen my debit card number. So yeah, they tried to rent a
Oh.
boat in Alabama, so it got shut off. And so it wasn't, it was a user error. Uh, I was going on a trip right after that. So I'm like, well, get a new card, put everything on the credit card, and just hope for the best. So yeah,
Gosh. Well,
yeah.
better to find it out, right?
Better to find out early, yeah. And
Yeah.
modern modern AI, whatever you say about it, they did flag it and block the card very early because I
That's
clearly am
good.
not renting a boat in Alabama. I just am not. So yeah. For someone listening who wants to go find out more about you, this book, and get the book because this will be out right when this is coming out, like where should they
Yeah.
go to find out more?
Yeah, the easiest place to go, I would say, is drinkdryads.com. It's drink like the word drink and then dryads, dryads.com. That's the companion website for the book. We're going to keep some information, not only about the book on that website, but also about dryads in general. We're hoping to be able to provide at least some sort of guidance for U.S. consumers about where they might be able to access dryads and which ones might be available in those places, both of which will hopefully be lists that get longer and longer with time.
Awesome.
But
Awesome.
that will also be a good sort of place to landing place to find more information about the book. Um, and the book itself is going to be available wherever fine books are sold, right? You can get it through bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, your favorite local indie.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, for anyone who's listening to that, say in the car, didn't have the ability to write that down, those links will be in the show notes. So don't fear, be right there. And Brian, thanks for joining us today. It was a real
Thank you very
pleasure to
much
get
for
to talk to
having
you.
me. Oh,
Yeah.
pleasure's mine.
thank you for listening. That is today's episode. Now, if you have not taken a moment to check out our website, please do. It's servesyouRightPod.com. We have past episodes and all sorts of other things there. If you want to get in touch with me, that's the place to do it. I do appreciate that you've given me your most valuable asset, your time and attention. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned. We have some really cool guests coming up. I would hate it if you missed it. Cheers.